Hey man, got any more?
Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and murderous rats. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at Beyond Re-Animator. The third and final arc in the Re-Animator trilogy picks up 13 years after Bride, during which Herbert West has been locked up for his crimes. A young doctor who witnessed one of the reanimations all those years ago has arrived to work with West, but quickly finds he also can't control the inmate's never-ending quest for research. Herbert's newest scientific breakthrough partially revives the deceased's personality, but doesn't quite cure that reanimation rage we all know and love. Chaos eventually breaks out in the prison as the living, the reanimated, and the creatures somewhere in between duke it out. Beyond was once again directed by Brian Yuzna, making him one of the most consistent people in the trilogy. The story was written by Miguel Tejada Flores, who has written for Revenge of the Nerds and Fright Night Part 2. He and Yuzna also worked together on Rottweiler and Faust around the same time. The movie was a co-production between the US and Spain, which is why you'll notice a lot of Spanish crew members and actors involved. Gotta love those tax breaks. While Bruce Abbott does not return as Dan, we thankfully get Jeffrey Combs returning as Herbert West. This time he is joined by Jason Barry from Titanic, Elsa Pataki from Fast 5, Simon Andrew from Bad Man's River, Enrique Arce from Money Heist, and Santiago Segura from Torrente. The cinematography was done by Truman's Andrew Reves, and the score was composed by Obaba's Xavier Capellas. The movie had a super small budget of $3 million and actually ended up premiering on the Sci-Fi Channel. For that, it was cut down to a PG rating, but it did have a very limited R-rated release in theaters. Beyond Re-Animator received mixed reviews from critics who enjoyed Combs' performance and the occasionally shocking moment, but found it looking cheap and very derivative of the originals. It currently has a 55% and 39% on Rotten Tomatoes, so while more critics enjoyed Beyond, more general audiences enjoyed Bride. It's also been a few years since I've last seen Beyond, but I remember having fun with it the one and only time I watched it. I'm sure it's gonna have some of those low-budget woes, but I'm hoping it brings some genuine originality to the table. Put your pet rats away for this one, folks, because we're watching Beyond Re-Animator. The movie opens with two boys camping by a particular cemetery as the older Howie tells a young friend a spooky story. Then he whips out a sheep's eye and they discuss optography and souls before hearing footsteps outside. There's a few nods to optography and the idea that a person's last sight is in their eye when they die, but it literally goes nowhere. I have no idea why it's a part of the movie. This silent POV has made its way to Howie's house though, and it watches his sister Emily from outside. The boys find the front door open and head inside, not noticing some muddy footprints. Emily notices something is off and searches the house, but she just runs into Howie, who she oddly puts in between her legs. In comes a jawless reanimation to break up the incestual fun, and despite some fighting from Emily, it grabs her by the throat. Howie cries in fear as his sister gets her head bashed in, and as she slumps to the floor, the ugly bastard starts guzzling some milk. An officer runs in and lands a couple of headshots to kill the thirsty devil, and Howie cries over his sister's corpse. Howie watches as the police clean up the horrid scene, and witnesses a severed hand grab at an officer. We also confirm Herbert survived the cave-in and he has been arrested for the murders his creations have committed. He nods for Howie to pick up the reagent and he admires the glowy goo as Herbert is driven away. Oh snap, these opening credits go pretty hard. I hope the rest of the movie is this solid. This rat brings us 13 years into the future where he will have to overcome this terrifying trap to earn his cheddar. Oh no, Remy, no! Rat number 18 falls victim to West, who electrifies the poor creature to obtain some sparkly stuff we'll learn about later. The dim-witted Sergeant Mancho appears to give West a new work order, and we travel down the vent a bit to meet Cabrera, who was friends with the rat Herbert just killed. He interrogates his roommate Moses over Ratty's location, but Mancho hints that West may know his true location. He threatens West a bit later, but unconcerned Herbert just denies seeing Ratty. This young doctor who, spoiler alert, is that boy Howie all grown up, makes his way inside the prison and immediately lays his eyes on West. He and Mancho visit a part of the prison called the Death House, which is for all the death row inmates. He overhears Warden Brando creepily welcome a journalist named Laura who is doing a story on the death penalty. He clearly gets off by scaring and electrocuting inmates, but his creepiness is interrupted by Howard. Brando asks why a top-of-his-class doctor would choose to work in a prison, but he simply says he is interested in institutional medicine. He and Laura hit it off right away, and she and Brando learn that the doctor has brought a special toolkit with him. Brando also asks why he's requested West to assist him and warns that his arrogance can be contagious. That Nosferatu-looking fella named Moses collapses in the yard, and he rambles to Howard about his cannibalism issues. While Howard is distracted, an inmate named Speedball snatches the doctor's briefcase, but the officers quickly retrieve it. Herbert is waiting when the group arrives with Moses, who has suffered a heart attack. Nurse Vanessa has trouble inserting the IV, and West perks up when Howard refers to him as Doctor. He sends Vanessa and the guards away, and despite rigorous defibrillation, West tells Howard there is no chance of saving Moses. Howard clearly has the same life-saving hangups as Dan, and Herbert asks why he has been summoned to work with him. Howard tells West he is very familiar with his experiments, revealing he was the boy he saw 13 years ago. He hands West the reagent, who immediately wants to see if it still works, and of course, Howard is too powerless to say no. They inject Moses, although West assumes it will not work, and Howard offers to help him make more reagent. Foamy Moses slowly rises up and grabs Howard by the throat, but West smacks him with a trash can. Howard loads up to sedate him while he tangles with some guards, one of whom he munches on before West finally jabs him. Moses isn't done yet though, but the sight of Brando scares him back into submission. Just kidding, Moses grabs him by the nuts before finally being apprehended. Howard nervously drops the reagent while lying about what happened, and when West tries to explain, he gets 12 months added to his sentence. Brando puts the prison on lockdown and sends Moses to the hole. On his way out, West mentions that his last partner turned on him in court, and he expects better from Howard. The prisoners are corralled inside, and creepy-ass Brando watches as Howard drives Laura and her injured ankle home. The warden asks Moses what the doctors gave him, but he tells Brando that he is dead and this prison is hell. Howard has apparently stayed for dinner, and the two make some drunken banter before we learn that Brando has declined to let Laura return to the prison for her story. He cheers her up a bit and tells her to keep working on it, and eventually explains what happened to his sister. That night made him feel helpless and inspired him to bring the dead back to life, which is why he studied Dr. West and the research that ultimately got his sister killed. Working a little backwards there, Doc. Then he tells Laura she looks like his dead sister, and he tries to peace out of there. Lady, what part of what just happened made you want to kiss him? Howard voices his concerns to Herbert as they seek out a private lab, but West tells him he is on the verge of perfecting a chemical to restore what is lost in the typical reanimation. Howard kind of agrees to help, and Herbert tells him his lady friend can know absolutely nothing. Good luck with that. Then we get a long-ass montage of the progress they make in their new lab, which climaxes with a sex scene. Howard almost spills the tea immediately about Moses being a dead man, and he unknowingly supports Laura into sneaking into the prison for her story, which now revolves around Herbert and the Miskatonic Massacre. Howard looks over Speedball, who is clearly faking an illness to get drugs, and a bit later he and Cabrera promise to kill West in the yard today. The boys have finished their first batch of reagent and whip out Ratty to test it on, and Laura meets with Brando to ask for another tour and an interview with him. He agrees on the condition that they have dinner together, and unfortunately she agrees. West explains that upon death, all animals lose a nearly unnoticeable amount of weight, which he believes comes from the cerebral cortex. This nanoplasmic energy comes from the electricity within the cortex, but West believes it is located in every cell of the body. They pump Ratty full of reagent and he bursts to life, but West says he won't truly live again until he receives some NPE. They inject the sparkly stuff inside the rodent, and Ratty returns to his sweet, peaceful state. Laura manages to bribe her way into Moses' cell, although she will be in there alone with him. Herbert and for some reason Howard go out to the yard where they avoid being shanked by returning Ratty to Cabrera. But it appears Ratty may still be a teeny bit fucked up. Laura tries asking Moses what happened to him, but all he can explain is that he's hungry. To make things even worse, Brando hops inside as well. He's pissed about being lied to, but before he can do anything, Moses bites a chunk out of his face. That gets him smacked until he is good and dead, and Brando unlocks his straitjacket to make self-defense seem more plausible. To prove she won't snitch on him, Brando has Laura get on all fours and bark like a dog. And yeah, then he tries to force her to give him a blowjob, and she unsuccessfully tries to escape. Herbert wants to insert Ratty's NPE into Moses, but Howard argues that hopping from species to species is ethically wrong. West gets all self-righteous with his research and argues that Moses isn't even a human being at the moment, but will be again with some sweet NPE. Oh hey Howard, yeah, the warden strangled your girlfriend to death, which is legitimately sad and fucked up. Mancho of course says Moses is the one who killed her, and this was all the catalyst Howard needed to try another human experiment. He injects the reagent and some drugs to keep her calm, and deems her safe enough to unrestrain, I guess. Poor reanimated Laura is so traumatized she starts barking like a dog again, and they bring her to their private lab. Mancho realizes that Moses isn't as dead as they thought, and the prison goes back into lockdown while they search for him. Cabrera is happy to have Ratty back home, that is until he realizes his roommate is back and has the munchies. Moses spits Ratty onto Mancho, and the rat bites his nose and crawls around his outfit. Cabrera slams the lieutenant to stop him from hurting Ratty, and Moses bashes his head in with a billy club. West and Howard argue over inserting Ratty's NPE into Laura, and Brando arrives hoping to have his ear sewn back on. He finds them in their secret lab and threatens to have Howard's medical license removed and promises West he will never leave this prison. Then he sees foamy-ass Laura, and West conks him with a microscope. Cabrera uses Mancho's keys to unlock all of the cells, and the prison goes into a full-on riot. West preps the barely living Brando to have his NPE removed, and Howard reluctantly agrees to help. Herbert shocks the warden with 2,000 volts until he is truly dead, and that sweet life nectar has been obtained. Speedball and some others go to raid the infirmary, and when Ratty bites Cabrera on the lip, he blames West, I guess. They inject the NPE into Laura, and it looks like she's back to normal. Oh, wait a second, the human body should not pulse that way. She suddenly starts talking a lot like Brando, but jolts back to herself as the inmates make it to the infirmary. Cabrera grabs West and asks what he did to Ratty, but gets distracted when he sees Laura and hopes to rape her. Laura twitches around a bit and begins to fight back, and Howard follows her and Cabrera but loses them in the chaos. Laura finds herself in some vacant burning cell block, and West plans a getaway before he realizes he has a bit more NPE he can play with. She tries to hide from Cabrera and his cronies, but he eventually finds her. I got bad news though, boys, that isn't exactly Laura in there. Brando awakens to learn he has been reanimated and injected with rodent NPE, and West intends on learning if cross-species energy makes a difference. After some research and the arrival of more police and SWAT teams, West decides it's about time he blows this popsicle stand. He does leave the door open so the inmates are sure to find him bound and ready to be tortured. The SWAT teams prepare to enter when Howard cuts in front of them, and looks like Brando made short work of his restraints, Dr. West. Speedball and this guy Winnie are stealing lots of yummy drugs when they are interrupted by the very ratty warden. He starts beating the inmate until Mancho stumbles in his way and gets beaten as well. Speedball downs fistfuls of pills as Brando kills the lieutenant and mistakes reagent for heroin when he reanimates the officer. Laura wakes up in a pool of blood, which appears to be caused by her now violent, sentient hands. She's found by Brando, who is too busy rambling about crime and punishment to notice Speedball stealing his reagent. Brando now has a new superior way of punishing inmates, which is basically reanimating them through death sentences over and over. Speedball injects the good stuff, and by golly, he's having a good time with it. Meanwhile, poor nurse Vanessa is being attacked by Moses, who momentarily stops to pray before biting her titty. Howard finds West and voices his displeasure with everything that has happened, and while West really doesn't care, he offers to help search for Laura. Oh yay, Vanessa is alive I guess, but this dumbass trying to arrest Moses sure is not. They unload a bunch of lead into the reanimation, which I think puts him down for good. The boys make their way to the death house as Brando gropes Laura and he has her get back on her knees. Warden Laura kicks into gear and sends Manchu away, and she proceeds to bite his dick off. Ratty runs off with the appendage, Howard runs to find Laura, and Herbert is attacked by half of Cabrera. Herbert gets the upper hand though and yeets him away, and Speedball is just living in his own world at the moment. Laura tells Howard she is being taken over and needs to kill whatever it is inside of her, but then the NPE takes over and goes full girl boss. She starts kicking his ass, and Herbert tries talking Speedball out of taking more reagent to no avail. The side effects to overdosing on reagent turn out to be quite severe, but technically it didn't kill him. Howard tackles Laura and the real her begs for him to kill her, and the Rat Warden takes his cane back. NPE Laura starts beating his ass again, and he barely stops her from stilettoing him in the face. Cabrera catches up with West as he interrogates Rat Warden, but despite his best attempt at flight, Herbert beats the life out of him. Laura is still beating up Howard and now wrapping her thighs around his head because that's a weird consistency in this film. She starts choking him as Laura begs him to stop her, and West straps Brando into his favorite killing device. Howard manages to reach a knife and repeatedly slash her throat as she cheers him on, and West fries the Warden, giving him some melty face. Herbert finds Howard cradling Laura's severed head, who he is now referring to as Emily. Realizing his new colleague is a lost cause, Herbert snatches Howard's ID and leaves him behind. The SWAT team finds Howard talking a lot like crazy Dr. West, while the real one impersonates Howard to escape the prison walls. The movie ends with Laura's severed head laughing at and with traumatized Howard, and Herbert West finally walking away as a free man. There's also a mid-credit scene involving Ratty and Brando's dick having a boxing match, so that's cool I guess. And that's Beyond Re-Animator. It's a bit of a mixed bag, but I think I was overall pleasantly surprised. The prison environment helps to give it a very distinct feel and helps it to stand out compared to the two hospital-based predecessors. The characters are more stylized than ever, but I mostly think they're a lot of fun. While not as funny as the original, I do think the humor in this works a bit better for me than the humor in Bride did. There are a few cringy moments, but not enough of them to detract from the overall experience for me. Jeffrey Combs once again gives a standout performance. He's older, wiser, and much more willing to stab his collaborators in the back. The rest of the performances are a mix of mediocre and over the top, which makes sense given the small budget and the international production. A few characters are clearly speaking Spanish, and their dubbing is just not believable at all. It's not the end of the world, but it makes us believing this story is happening in Massachusetts really hard to believe. But I think my biggest complaint is the constant threat of the women characters being sexually harassed and assaulted. Re-Animator has always had that element, but I think Beyond relies on it a bit too often. Even the sort of protagonist has weird incesty subconscious thoughts about Laura. It is a fun twist to have her seek her own vengeance, even though she isn't quite herself. The visual effects are still really good, and they go some really fun routes that work perfectly with Screaming Mad George's style. With everything considered, I'd say it's probably the worst of the trilogy, but it has enough unique stuff going on to warrant a watch for sure. All in all, Beyond Re-Animator is a fun, although lackluster finale to West's story. I can be pretty iffy about sequels and reboots, but Re-Animator is one of the few franchises that I think deserves more. We've had a recent revival of great horror comedies with great practical effects, and there's definitely room for a great Re-Animator sequel in the 2020s. But if you're gonna do that, you gotta bring back Dan, and you gotta pit him against Herbert for the finale. That will probably never happen, but a little YouTuber can dream. Well, that's about it. Next week I'll finally be doing a burger review. Sorry I kept you waiting so long. Thank you all for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of Beyond Re-Animator. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, you should check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for new movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks y'all.